started a tradition of doing a humor or joke concert last year, but when the great Peter Schickele passed away a few months ago, we realized that we had the opportunity to pivot because we have among us the photographer who did some of the most famous photos of PDQ Bach. You'll recognize many of them if you're a PDQ Bach fan. Peter Schaaf joined us a few years ago. He moved to Houston from New York to join his daughter here, and he had an amazing career both as a pianist and as a photographer, not only of Peter Schickele, but of other classical music groups. He has done many album covers. He has a wonderful website, peterschaaf.com, that's S-C-H-A-A-F, and I drew his biography from the website. So Peter Schaaf studied piano at the Juilliard School starting at age 8 in the prep division, and later he earned degrees from Juilliard studying Sasha Gordnitsky and Rosina Levine. He won the Kosciuszko Foundation Chopin Prize and the Morris Loeb Prize from Juilliard. He gave solo recitals, played a concerto with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, and then accompanied many recitals of Kyung-Hwa Chung, Yo-Yo Ma, including his New York debut in Carnegie Recital Hall, Renata Tebaldi, and John Vickers, among others. With Vickers, he toured in Canada and the United States, and there's a commercial recording of them performing Schubert's Die Winterreise. You can also see it on YouTube, it's wonderful. He returned to the piano in 2008 after many years and has begun performing in public again. And most recently, he did a recording of Chopin, which is you can download on his website or buy it as a CD. In photography, he started in the 1970s as a hobbyist, and to afford the equipment he needed, he started taking jobs, mostly photographing art objects. He taught himself technical skills from many books and learned composition also from books and from studying famous photographs of art. Eventually, he gravitated to portraiture, which he loves because it adds elements of psychology and intuition. He has photos published in Time, Life, Newsweek, and People magazines, and many photos in the New York Times Arts and Leisure section over the years. Artists he has photographed for posters, LP and CD covers include Peter Schickele, Rob Kapelau, Vladimir Ashkenazy, Eli Anneling, Isaac Stern, Rudolf Serkin, Peter Serkin, Carol Vincents, and Seiji Ozawa. For many years, he has done portrait and event photography for the Juilliard School and other arts organizations. In 1979, he started taking close-up photos of musical instruments, and this resulted in a children's book, The Violin Close-Up, and other collections of images. There's an online version of that I looked at yesterday, which will be fabulous for violin teachers to teach new students the parts of the violin, beautiful photographs. So I give you Peter Schaaf.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie, for that elaborate introduction. Just one thing I'll add, it's very interesting. You mentioned I had a lot of photographs in the New York Times. When Peter Schickele died, I was really surprised to see my photograph on the front page of the New York Times, which I had never dreamed I'd be on. It's sort of actually, I knew Peter as a friend and as a client from photography. I didn't know the extent of his fame. It was enough so that he rated a page 1 obituary. Peter Schickele was a composer. He spent his life writing music and making a name for himself as a serious composer. But there was one thing wrong. He had an even greater talent for comedy. What started as a lark ended as a very successful career by making zany shows that lampooned classical music in new ways. Audiences loved them. For most years of his adult life, Peter would spend roughly 6 months creating a new PDQ Bach show and touring with it. The other months were spent writing serious compositions. To his regret, these never achieved the reputation he desired for them. In 1959, when he was a student of composition at the Juilliard School, he and George Mester, a fellow student and a conductor, presented a humorous concert at the school. It became an annual event for 4 or 5 years. In 1965, it moved to Town Hall, and the public was invited. People loved it, and it soon went to Carnegie Hall. It was very popular year after year. Every Schickele concert began the same way. Someone would announce that Professor Schickele was delayed at the airport, and nobody knew when or if he could come. This lasted a long time. But suddenly Peter would appear somewhere in the hall yelling, "I'm here, I'm here!" And he'd make some dash to the stage, either by running or jumping or sliding down a rope. This was Carnegie Hall in 1976 in New York, where he did a Tarzan-like swinging entrance. I've always wondered how he convinced the hall to allow it, to facilitate it. A rope was attached to the ceiling of the proscenium arch and tied loosely to the railing of the first box. A spotlight was pre-aimed at that box, and Peter would enter the box yelling and waving his arms. He would grab onto the rope, step over the railing, and swing down to the stage, which had been cleared of music stands in his path. It was sensational. I had seen him do it the previous year, so I knew exactly where to sit with my camera and when to be ready. I met Peter in 1960, when I was a new piano student at Juilliard. When I entered, the rule was that all piano students had to take ear training classes. I had already had lots of ear training from my years in Juilliard's preparatory division, so the advisor put me into the 4th year class, Advanced Ear Training, which was meant for composers and conductors. Actually, Philip Glass was one of the composers in that class. The instructor was Peter Schickele, who was 25 then. It was a fun class. Every student already had well-trained ears, and Peter would invent humorous exercises for us. He would play a cluster of notes on the piano and ask, "Which note did I leave out?" Or he would purposely confuse students who had perfect pitch by playing a dictation after saying that it started on a different pitch from what he was going to play. I attended one of his hilarious Juilliard concerts and a couple of his town hall ones, but it wasn't until the 1970s that I began another relationship with him. By then, I had stumbled into my own secondary talent, photography, and I was beginning to be known for portraits of musicians. PDQ Bach's fame was spreading, and Peter needed new photos for publicity, so he called me. This shot was taken at his home in Brooklyn before he moved to Manhattan. But everything else I'll show you today was shot in my apartment in Manhattan. For nearly 40 years, he would come every year with new ideas for funny shots, and we would figure out how to make them happen. He was always enthusiastic, easy to work with, and a pleasure to know. This plaster bust, slightly damaged, was actually found by Peter in a trash can in New York City on the street. He immediately recognized it as a bust of PDQ Bach. The basic concept was that Professor Schickele was a musical archaeologist who discovered the compositions of the forgotten son of J.S. Bach's more than 20 children. Peter named him PDQ Bach upon one of the real sons who were composers, C.P.E. Bach and J.C. Bach, not to mention J.S. Bach himself. To show it was a joke, he invented dates for PDQ that were backwards. The death occurred before the birth. Here are some examples of Peter's zany shots from the 1980s. If these shots were made recently, people could say, "Oh yeah, Photoshop, nice." But Photoshop didn't exist then, and there was no darkroom trickery. These are real photos, not gimmicks. Here he took a real flute, had it cut, and had a headband soldered between the pieces, just like the old gag of a clown running around with an arrow through his head. Unfortunately, the flute was very heavy and painful on his temples, so he warned me to shoot fast because he couldn't wear it long. In his concerts, he would sometimes walk onto stage wearing it, but only briefly. You can see that his shirt is untucked and his tie is askew. The professor always dressed this way, to poke fun at the formal dress and pomposity of classical music conventions. This was a core motivation of his humor, spoofing pretension and tradition. Here the bassoon headpiece was hanging by some thread from a photo equipment. It would rotate slowly on the thread, and Peter followed along under it to get this shot, which he used on a flower. Flute, bassoon, violin, no instrument was safe. With Photoshop, it would have been easy to put the tennis ball into the shot. But there was no Photoshop, so Peter had to bounce it on the floor, and I had to catch it at the right height. Here there was an assistant standing behind Peter. This shot, Peter is actually jumping here. No gimmicks. It's very hard to do. I certainly can't do that. He couldn't do that jump more than a few times, so he warned me to get the shot early. He was very athletic, actually. He loved physical stunts, like the rope swing entrances, or running down the aisle from the back of a hall and belly flopping under the stage. Here Peter rented an 18th century outfit to be PDQ Bach for some shots. This is just a silly shot with a model's arm caught in the trombone. But now we have Oedipus Tex, which was a dramatic oratorio set in Texas. I'm sure it was performed here. Peter sang the lead role of Oedipus, and the chorus was called the OK Chorale. But it was spelled C-H-O-R-A-L-E. The record label of this earned Peter one of his 4 Grammy Awards for Best Comedy Album. Oh, speaking of Texas, here's John Kimura Parker, who teaches piano at Shepherd School. He was a soloist in one of PDQ's concertos. So these are some old photos put behind a new one with Photoshop now in 2005. The new color shot of Peter. And now, this is sort of my favorite shot because it was, I really invented it. In this, with Photoshop, I could make this shot. I had Peter's assistant push a boxing glove into Peter's face, which was flattening his nose for shot number 1. Then, without moving the camera or changing the light, I set up the music rack and the extending arm for shot number 2. And later I could combine them in the computer. And finally, here's Peter finally getting to meet and greet PDQ Bach, his greatest creation. That's it for my talk, but Debbie has combed the internet for some videos of Peter Schickele's shenanigans. So, thank you.
We have one last shot ending Peter's talk. So the next things we have are a couple of videos, and I'm probably one of the millions of children and adults that Peter Schickele taught about sonata allegro form through his sportscast of Beethoven Fifth. That was my first exposure to him. I had only seen audio, but a number of years back when Orchestra X was active in Houston, a very talented group of young orchestral musicians performed it live, and it is absolutely perfect. I'm going to show it in its entirety.
And they're off with a 4-note theme. I don't know whether it's slow or fast because it keeps stopping, folks. It doesn't seem to be able to get off the ground. But it does look like we're coming up to a cadence here. The violins didn't cut off. section really plugged that note. That has got to be one of the worst fumbles I've ever witnessed in all my days. I think that was Bobby Corno, wasn't it, Gibbs?
Yes, it was, Pete.
Well, we're going to be having an instant replay on that. Okay, that is no doubt, to me there's no doubt about that. The referee has ruled in favor of the conductor. He has stopped a 30-ball penalty on the bending horn player, who is now on his way over to the penalty box.
That is Bobby Corno in the first chair. And that's the third major flop he's made this season, giving him a solo average for the season of approximately .247,233, Pete, which is pretty darn low for a first chair person.
You think there's some chance he may be traded to another orchestra?
Well, Pete, it's hard to say. Corno was very good at the long solos, things like the Rachmaninoff piano concerto, so I think if he pulls himself together a bit, they'll keep him around. Although I suppose that...
Okay, we're off again now, Giff. The orchestra is playing without its first horn, which means we can be looking for a power play from the conductor pretty soon. But that's a pretty stiff penalty, isn't it, Giff? 30 bars?
Yes, it is, Pete. Although these bars go by pretty fast, it isn't really that much in terms of time. I think the longest that anyone has ever stayed in the penalty box was when George Sell played in the Philadelphia Orchestra in 1955, and the entire French horn section spent the whole last moment in the penalty box. Of course, in spite of that, the Phillies came out on top.
I tell you what, Giff, I think we're getting into development section here. Let's see what happens after the double bar. Well, the horns are starting things off, and they seem to be in pretty good shape now. And I get the feeling we're going to be hearing a lot of that four-note motif, don't you, Giff?
Yes, I do, Pete.
So do I, Giff. Well, they're probably stuck with that now for quite a while, so I think what we ought to do is take a little break for station identification.
This is WTWP, wall-to-wall Pachelbel, Cooper.
Okay, we're back now, folks. And there's something going on out there. It's really building up tension. The brass is running with activity, and I think we're building up to a feud. No, it is not a feud, folks. The violins tried to make it one, but the bassists just are not following up. Now, instead of a feud, they seem to be taking that thing and breaking it up into little pieces. There's two notes left of that thing. It's getting softer and softer down there. I think they're running out of steam, if you want to know the truth. Getting just a little bit lethargic. Only one note left of that theme now being tossed around from player to player. Wait a minute. Here come the brasses, trying to cut things up a welcome relief, but I'm afraid to no avail. Things are still pretty soft. Here they come again now. They sound very determined, and I do believe we've reached the recap, don't you, Giff?
Well, there's no doubt about it, Pete. Your average Beethoven symphony usually has a recap after the second quarter, and this one is falling right in line.
Well, let's see if those violins can cut off for the rest of the orchestra here. Wait, this time it's the oboe holding the note. Well, she's playing a cadenza. She must be out of her mind. She thinks it's an oboe concerto. The conductor is protesting there. I've never heard anything like that. Have you, Giff?
I certainly haven't. I think it was a disgraceful display of lack of teammanship. And I wouldn't be Oh, can you believe it?
The referee has had to separate them. I'm telling you, you don't want to mess with her. You know, I think we're going to have a ruling now on that. How about that? He has ruled in favor of the orchestra. I guess that cadenza must have been written in the part after all. And there's a delay of game penalty, a 34-bar penalty against Schickele, who is now over in the penalty box himself. And he'll be lucky to get back in time for the second theme. Well, I guess high would knew what she was doing. Yeah.
She usually does, Pete, and this time she not only scored a personal solo, but she also made it possible for the orchestra to recover from Bobby Cordo's fumble there in the exposition.
That was a bad one, too.
It was.
I think we're ready to resume play now. The referee has given the captain of the orchestra the sign. Okay, they're off. They're off again. They're doing pretty well. I think they're really making up for lost time. Anyway, we're into the home stretch here, folks. We've got the second theme coming up, and we should be in C minor right up to the last double bar. Jacoby is back on the mound. Hey, this is really something. You know, this piece is billed as being in C minor, and yet it looks like it's going to end in C major.
It's really something, Pete.
It is something, yeah. And I think it's going to be. Oh, wait a minute. I think we have an injury in the bass section. Our referee has blown the whistle, and the referee's blown the whistle. That's what he's done.
Well, it looks like it's a groin injury, Pete. That's what happens when the basses get too close to him.
He's on his way out.
You know, management is always trying to save space, especially in the bass section, which usually contains some of the biggest players in the band. Sometimes they just squeeze them just a little bit too close to the cap.
That's what happens, right?
Now this is the result. Now that's good. Well, not the best.
I tell you what, there's a lot of substitution in here.
He looks like he was in very bad shape.
He looks like he's in a different league, if you ask me.
I think you're right.
The referee's putting him into the position there.
Yeah, got it.
Listen to that. I think this is going to be a whole new ball game here. Okay, they're getting ready to resume play now. And we're off. The orchestra only has a few more bars to go for a first downbeat. Things are really beginning to roll here. They've added all the woodwinds, they've thrown in the brass and the timpani, and it's tuning all the way, folks. They've got a great drive going on out there. It looks like we're coming into the home stretch, ain't it?
Well, Pete, it's been a good match.
And a very good match indeed. Wait a minute. The brasses are taking the theme. They are not letting it stop. If this piece is definitely going to go into overtime, I can tell that. And let me tell you that nobody knows where this theme is. There's a lot of running around down there, but nobody knows what the theme is. Believe me, folks, it's very exciting. Oh, it's going wild. They've got a new theme going on out there. I can't believe it, kid. Do you know where this new theme comes from?
Well, Pete, it probably comes from, I don't know.
Thanks a lot, kid, for your big help. Well, they're tossing around now. The woodwinds have it, and then the strings. Nobody seems to be able to keep his or her hands on that theme. Believe me, folks, the people in the stands are just as confused as the players. Wait a minute now. The strings have got a hold of things. The strings have got a hold, and they're not going to let go. What's this? It sounds like another recap. It sounds like they're going right back to the beginning. If this is true, it's the first time in 40 years in concert casting. Wait a minute. Those do sound like final chords, though. We are watching the referee, and that is it. That is the end of the Oh, okay. What a minute. Unbelievable. That was one solid winner. Okay.
So if you want to relive the hilarity, both the entire concert and just this excerpt of Beethoven 5 are on YouTube. Search for Orchestra X and PDQ Bach. So I have one more. We have to have a piece by PDQ Bach himself, of course. So this is a double violin concerto written for Itzhak Perlman and a very famous Russian violinist at the Boston Pops, but I do have the lead up to that performance.
Absence in the solo violin parts of the note of middle C. Now, middle C, you know, it's the sort of the center of our musical range. It's a very unusual to have a piece that has no middle C's on it. And the solo parts, the only time it happens is at the end when the whole violin section is playing along with them. So I did some research about that, and I found that in the very last years of the 18th century, there was a man named Hans Holtzmann in Wein am Rhein, who was a woodcutter and also a wood carver. And he started carving scrolls. You know, that's the curly part on the end of the violin there. He made these beautiful scrolls. And violinists just fell in love with them. They started having them put on their own violins, you know. But then they found out that middle C just didn't speak. I mean, there was no tone, it was like muffled. And it turns out that it had to do with how it was carved. And so, of course, they got rid of him and stopped using him. And poor Holtzmann is still known as the man responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls. Glad to see such an appreciation for scholarship. I'm looking forward to hearing this work. This is only the second time it's been played in modern times, which probably means it's only the second time it's ever been played, knowing PDQ Bach's reputation. So all I can say is I'm terribly excited. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I am pleased to share the stage with a major new star in the music world. He is a wonderful violinist. An artist like this only comes along once every generation, and we are fortunate to have him with us tonight. He's traveled thousands of miles from his native Russia to be with us for his debut. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome young Ivan Pirochuk. Professor Schickele, can you come up a minute, please?
Look, maybe I could.
But you don't play the violin.
But my brother does. I've seen it many times.
Look, ladies and gentlemen, we have some good news and some bad news. And the good news is that, fortunately, we have a substitute violinist. The bad news is he's never played a violin before. So, is there a violin? And is there a violin? Why does that not surprise me?
Thank you.
Sure. Excuse me. Ladies and gentlemen, making his debut tonight with the Boston Pops is Professor Peter Schickele.
us a lot about classical music by teaching us what it is not. I am going to finish with one of his own compositions, which is actually quite beautiful. There's a set of elegies for clarinet and piano, and I'm just going to play the first one that I found on YouTube. Jenny McClay is the clarinetist, and Gaspard Tanguay-Labrosse is the pianist. So Peter Schickele died this year at the age of 88. And I probably should have said in this day of Peters, the conductor of Orchestra X was Peter Jacobi.